That's how you can manipulate or motivate them in the direction you want them to go. When you can anticipate how they're going to react to how you move and what you say simultaneously, it puts you in a position of far more control than they have.
Andrew Bustamante is a former CIA operative and Air Force veteran with nearly a decade in global intelligence. He's a world-class expert in covert influence and psychological control, and now he's sharing the same playbook spies use to shape outcomes in business and everyday life.
You can objectively assess most individuals very impulsively, very quickly, into these 4 different temperament categories. We've got foxes, cheetahs, lions, and bears.
How do you go about profiling somebody? You're sitting across from them and putting them into one of these 4.
The fastest way to go about understanding it is...
Andrew Bustamante exposes elite manipulation tactics used by spies to control reality-influenced choices and shift power silently. These are the tools behind persuasion, politics, and how the world really works. You'll discover how these invisible tools are being used on you every single day.
The question everyone's asking, are you still in CIA?
Do I work for them? If you want to hate me for that, that's fine. Leave it in the comments.
Andrew Bustamante, welcome back to the Dream Aloud podcast. I want to dive right into this, and I want to see this whole conversation around for the viewer to be able to, at the end of this, really understand how the CIA used influence tactics, persuasion tactics, so we can use it better in our life and in our business to essentially get more of the things that we want, and trust that the viewers will use their own moral compass with these skills. So that being said, you spent nearly a decade undercover in the CIA. I want to sort of unpack it a little bit. What are some really powerful persuasion tactics that you learned in CIA that might have come unexpected for you?
So there's a number of things that you said, Morgan, that were whole conversations on their own. So I just want to kind of subdivide those a little bit. So you asked specifically about persuasion tactics, right? At CIA, we don't see persuasion and influence as the same thing. So I'm going to answer your question about persuasion tactics, and I'm going to make sure that you understand that we have 2 different things. So if we want to get into influence, we'll have to do that later. And then second, you talked about being able to share how CIA uses psychological tradecraft, if you will, to get what they want. We use a lot of different types of it. I can share much of it, some of it, to try to give you an opportunity to ask any deeper questions that you want. But that's really a question of whether or not we want to manipulate people to get what we want or motivate people to get what we want. Those are the 2 primary thrusts of being able to psychologically incentivize someone to do what you want, right?
So what would be the difference? Motivation would be something for their benefit. Manipulation would be something for your benefit? Sort
of, yeah. That's actually not bad. We often talk about motivation and manipulation as if it's a coin. So imagine a coin, right? The coin itself has an image on one side, an imprint on one side. In the United States, we call it heads, and the opposite side, tails. One side has the head of a former president. The other side has basically a building, and we call that tails. We oftentimes think we have a game in the United States where we'll flip a coin, and you got to call heads or tails, something you do as a kid. Do you guys have anything like that here in Australia?
I have it on my phone. It's how I make most of my decisions in life.
There you go, right? The magic 8 ball.
Yes.
So we flip this coin, and you're voting for heads or you're voting for tails. That's a lot like manipulation and motivation. The coin, the actual value, the actual tool itself doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the 2 different faces of the coin. So in that coin for motivation manipulation, you're doing all the same skills. It's all the same value. It's all the same impact. It's just, do you do it with motivation or do you do it with manipulation? And then to your exact point, we define motivation as getting someone to do what you want them to do, and it's in their best interest. Where manipulation is getting someone to do what you want them to do, and it's not in their best interest. 80% of the equation is the same. You're still getting them to do what you want them to do. It's just a matter of whether or not it is in their best interest or it is not in their best interest.
Do you think it comes more of the time where you'd need to manipulate someone? Because I think when people hear the word manipulation, they have such a bad connotation with it. But if most people needed just motivation, they'd probably already be doing it. Because if I think about when I work with clients, or even in my program, there's certain areas where I have to manipulate them to do the thing that I know they need to do, but they might be scared to do it or call that decision on their own. So just thinking like contextually.
That's not manipulation.
So what is it?
That's motivation. You're getting people to do what you want them to do and it's in their best interest. That's the thing that's so powerful about understanding the difference between manipulation and motivation. The values judgment about it is bullshit, right? And the reason that most people get cringy around the word manipulation is because they're either pussies or they're fully ignorant of what manipulation actually is. Manipulation doesn't happen unless you get what you want and they get hurt. If they don't get hurt, they're not being fucking manipulated. They're being motivated. They're being incentivized, if you want to use a different word, right? They're being directed. They're being controlled. They're being guided, right? That's the difference. Manipulation harms the target in order to help the user or the handler. That's how CIA considers it, right? So that's how I consider it as well. Anytime you're helping somebody else, whether they want the help or not, if they come out the other end better, they've been motivated.
So was there anything specific in, like, when you first got started, was there anything specific where when you learned it as a tool or a tactic, you were like, fuck, I never expected to use that as a tactic to get someone to do what they want?
So I think the biggest lesson that I learned when I first got recruited and I started going through the training with CIA was that professionals, actual professionals, people who know what the fuck they're doing, right? Not amateurs, not fakers, not people who pat their own back but don't actually know what they're talking about. Actual professionals motivate first. They motivate first because motivation is so much more powerful than manipulation. It's so much more powerful to give someone something that benefits them that also benefits you because it creates momentum. It builds trust. It creates long-term psychological dependence. There's so many benefits to motivating someone to take an action rather than manipulating them. Because I grew up in a world where everybody was always paranoid about, oh, they're just trying to manipulate you. How many boyfriends are manipulating girlfriends? How many girlfriends are manipulating boyfriends? How many businesses are manipulating their customers? Everybody was constantly talking about manipulation when I was growing up. That's what it was like in the US. The paranoia is out of control for that. But in fact, motivation is so much more powerful. It is the go-to first. Only after you've exhausted all motivational options should you fall back on manipulation options. Because manipulation doesn't have any of the benefits that motivation has. When you manipulate somebody and they catch you, it degrades trust. When you manipulate somebody, even if they don't catch you, they still watch their own best interests recede, decline. That doesn't motivate them to want to continue doing the thing that you're asking them to do. So it's got a shelf life. What if you're a chemistry nerd, it's got a half-life, meaning that it actually exponentially degrades over time. So you could motivate somebody for the rest of their life, but you can only manipulate them for a limited period of time before they fall completely out of trust and alignment with you.
In my whole world of influence, like if I'm going to try to influence someone through sales or get my friends to come on a trip that I'm trying to convince them to come on, my first, and this is how I've always learned it, is I first need to read somebody to understand like what might be some of their motivators, like what's their personality type, what's their values, how do they make decisions usually? Are they someone who has to think about longer, or are they impulsive, or, and so I'm curious to know, like, apart from like Myers-Briggs stuff, because I know you guys are big on Myers-Briggs personalities, to quickly, like if you just meet someone to quickly assess their Myers-Briggs might be a little longer. Is there something shorter? Like, is there something a higher chunked personality profiling tool or technique you guys use? Like sometimes I used to use the colors. I don't know if you've used the colors, like a yellow personality, highest value is fun and people, and they're more extroverted. A red is very dominant and they're driven, and the blue is like love and connection, and whites are very analytical. So I used to sort of chunk them into these sort of things and then based off, what they might like. But I'm curious to know if you guys are playing similar.
So we do. I don't know what the color model is. I don't know if that's just like a Morgan Nelson special, or
no,
if
I learned like
from something else
years ago. I don't know where it came from, but that's probably one of the first like profiling things I played. Like, oh my God, that's easy. I can remember 4 colors.
So that's what's powerful, right? Being able to remember something simple.
You know what I found very, very interesting? That 97.8% of you that listen and view this podcast haven't yet subscribed. Now, if you're looking for the one way that you can actually help us build this show into something that's going to be absolutely incredible and life-changing for you, the one thing you can do is to hit that subscribe button, because it takes a lot of time, effort, and money that we put into this podcast to make it what it is. And we've made it very clear that we never want to run ads or sponsors or anything like that on this show. So the only way that we can actually grow this channel is by subscribers. And I promise to you that if you hit that subscribe button, you help this show grow, then I'm going to continually keep bringing more, bigger and better guests to teach you the skill set and the mindset that you wish you learned earlier in life. So please, it'll mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and do that right now. Now let's get into this episode.
We have this concept at CIA called operational utility. Operational utility means something is useful when you have to use it, right, during an operation. A lot of knowledge, a lot of education, a lot of training, a lot of Instagram, a lot of TikTok, a lot of college is not at all operationally useful. It's not useful when you need it. So you go through all these years of study, you read all these books, you take all these notes, and you can't actually recall the shit you need to recall at the moment you need to recall it to get what you want. So it does not have operational utility. Coming up with a simple 4-step or 4-grid process for identifying what you're dealing with, that is simple. So we have a 4-grid that's very similar to your colors, in the fact that there's 4 options. However, it's based in science, not based in something that you can't remember, right? Myers-Briggs is a 16-code personality type process. Well, 16 can be divided 4 times into 4, right? So each of those 16 varieties can actually be broken down into what's known as 4 different temperaments. Those 4 temperaments are something that you can very rapidly assess in somebody. Again, assessing means there's data behind your assessment. Assumption, when you just assume something, it means there isn't any objective data. It's just how you feel about them, right? So you can objectively assess most individuals very impulsively, very quickly into these 4 different temperament categories. And Myers-Briggs actually calls these temperaments different names that are kind of complicated. So CIA broke it down into 4 animal types. We've got foxes, cheetahs, lions, and bears. Foxes, cheetahs, lions, and bears. Kind of like you had red, yellow, blue, probably green or something like that. So these are our 4 character types. Foxes are idea people. Lots of ideas, lots of energy, lots of creativity.
And this is linked to Myers-Briggs?
Correct.
So what would a fox be in Myers-Briggs language? Or is this the higher chunked simplified version?
Correct. Simplified version is what you asked for, right?
Yeah.
So of the 4 different definitions in a Myers-Briggs personality type, the temperament takes just 2 of the 4. So it's less accurate than the full 4 in the personality type, but it allows you to be much faster when you determine it, right?
So foxes are ideas people.
Ideas, creativity, high energy, right? You're probably a fox, right? Cheetahs are action people. They take action right away. They don't even think about the risks. They just move. And there's lots of cheetahs out there.
Yeah.
And most employers are looking for cheetahs, but cheetahs are actually kind of hard to find. The next is called a lion. Lions are your organizers, your hyper-organized people, right? They make a checklist before they make a checklist. They make a to-do list. They want details before they ever commit to saying yes to anything, right? Those are your lions. And then your last one are your bears. Bears are people, right? People pleasers, people connectors. They're the ones that keep family meals together. They're the ones that make sure that everybody gets together for Thanksgiving. They're the ones that when they see you on Monday morning, they ask you, how are you doing? And actually mean it. They don't just ask you that as you're walking by and hope you don't answer. Those are bears. These 4 different temperaments exist in multiple different worlds in the CIA. We use the 4 temperaments to define targets. We use the 4 temperaments to define assets. We use the 4 temperaments to even build our teams of high-performing operators, because the highest performing team has a single operator from each of the 4 temperaments.
So how do we go about discovering, is there like questions, are you looking for values or the way they think, or how do you go about profiling somebody? You're sitting across them and putting them into one of these 4.
So I think the fastest way to go about understanding it is to really understand the nuances between each of the 4 types, right? So we just went and did a very fast overview. To dig into it a little bit deeper, fox people, they are ideas people. They are also non-committal people. They are also short on memory. They have a better short-term memory than a long-term memory. They have lots of ideas, but they don't finish any of their ideas, right? That's a fox. They can be introverted. They can be extroverted. They can be process-oriented. They can be innovative. But what really matters is that they have more ideas than they actually execute on, and the vast majority of their ideas are shit.
Would you say more visionary entrepreneurs are foxes?
I'm going to say exactly that, right?
Okay.
The reason that there are so many bad entrepreneurs, the reason there are so many fucking failures in the world is because they're foxes. People have lots of ideas and they can't get shit done.
Yeah.
People love to be like, I'm an idea person. I have so many ideas. And I'm so valuable because of my ideas. No, that doesn't make you valuable. Anybody can have ideas. The person who can have ideas and get their idea done, the person who can have ideas, test their ideas, stop wasting time on the bad ideas, put more resources towards the better ideas, that's somebody who actually has a future. Then we have cheetahs. Cheetahs are action takers. If you think about how you plan for a holiday, some people make a list of all the places they could go. Other people ask somebody else, are you available to come with me? Before they even think about where they're going to go. And then you've got some people who are like, I don't care where I go, but I know I want to skydive. I know I want to shoot guns. I know I want to scuba dive. And that's what determines where they go. Cheetahs just buy a ticket. The cheapest ticket, the first ticket, the fastest ticket. As soon as they want to go on holiday, they're like, I'm just going. And then you're like, why are you going to XYZ location? I don't know. It was the first ticket I bought. It was the first place that came to mind. That's a cheetah, right? A cheetah is the kind of person where you say, hey, who wants to volunteer? Hand goes up. They don't even know what they're volunteering for. That's a cheetah. Very impulsive.
Do you think Simona is a cheetah?
I don't think Simona is a cheetah.
You don't think? Which one do you think she is? Ideas.
I don't know.
She's ideas.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know Simona well enough. I've had dinner with her, and she seems to be your counterbalance. So I would imagine she's probably more on the lion side than anything else. But cheetahs, impulsive. They take action quickly. They jump loyalty quickly. They're loyal to you until you fuck them, and then they move on to something else. Even if you didn't intentionally screw them, for them, they took action believing in you. They learned a lesson. They shouldn't believe in you. They're gone, right? That's a cheetah. Lions, hyper-organized. Usually they're introverted because hyper-organized people run out of energy if they can't spend time alone. So they have to be able to spend time alone to get organized, and that's oftentimes what leads them to also be introverted. They're also generally process-oriented. So when they create their checklists and when they create their processes, they like the process of making processes. They don't care about outcomes as much as they care about the process that leads to the outcome, right? That's a lion. And then a bear is oftentimes somebody who likes to connect with people, but that doesn't mean they necessarily like to be around a lot of people. They might only like to connect to 2 or 3 people, right? They may know lots of folks, but only be friends with a few. Or they may work in an environment where there's lots of people and they're friends with everybody. Oftentimes, you're dealing with a bear if everybody likes the person, including you, and nobody really knows if the person likes them. That's a bear, because somehow they win everybody over because they're always connecting in a genuine way, but you never know if they're actually going to call you when they want to hang out.
What would be the most effective context to leverage understanding if someone's one of these? Like, is this something you want to try to look for and put someone into one of these boxes for sales or for negotiation or just to get them to buy your drink? Or
it's a first assessment. That was what you asked for. You said, what's the first assessment? When it's time to make a sale, you don't want to be rolling off of temperaments. Not if you're a professional. If you're an amateur, whatever, you do whatever the fuck you want to do. You knock on a door and then you try to scam them right there and then, right? But if you're an actual professional, then you have a process that you go through to build an initial assessment, to advance and mature your assessment, to come to a conclusion on a personality type, and then to create a sales strategy that's aligned with that person's personality type. Again, that's if you're a professional. If you're just trying to do whatever you can to scrape by whatever bucks you can get, it's a different story.
So, okay, so this is the first thing. So if I'm going to meet someone for the first time, make a as fast as I can judgment on how they think and operate, that's what I'm putting them into. Is there a second layer you're looking for?
So once you have an idea of what their assessment is, in our process of developing human assets, right? When CIA talks about a human asset, what they're talking about is a person, a human being, who can deliver value. That's what makes them an asset. A human being who can deliver value is a human asset. A human being who does not deliver value is not an asset. A human being that has the potential to deliver value is a target, right? But a human being who actually has demonstrated value is what we would consider an asset. So in the asset development process, meaning you take a human being and you test them to see if they have value and confirm that they have value, in that development process, you start with an initial assessment of their temperament. Based on their temperament, you're able to identify whether or not they will jive well with your temperament, right? Because you also have a temperament, whether you like it or not. Generally, CIA officers are hired to be foxes. They're hired to be fast, quick thinkers. They'll move from idea to idea. The big difference is they're trained to identify when their idea is a shitty idea and cut that idea off and move on to another one, right? We're trained to accept that of 10 ideas, 9 will be bad, and that doesn't make you a loser. That just makes you an operator, right? If you can accept the fact that most of your ideas are bad, you're already better than 99% of people out there who think all their ideas are good. The first step is, what's their temperament? The second step is, how does their temperament complement or contradict my temperament? There's a grid that we use, right, that puts in alignment all the temperaments. The reason we use that grid is because certain temperaments are in contrast to each other. Foxes are in conflict constantly with lions. That makes total sense if you think about it. People who have lots of ideas and very little follow-through are always going to be in conflict with people who are hyper-organized and are process-oriented. Those two are in conflict. So if you're talking to someone who's a lion and you know you're a fox, in that second stage of development, you're like, there's going to be problems here. You just know it. There's going to be problems. There's going to be miscommunication. There's going to be hurt feelings. I'm going to have to work twice as hard to develop this target because we're inherently in conflict. A cheetah and a bear, somebody who takes impulsive action versus somebody who wants to really get to know you as a person. Intrinsic conflict, right? They are not akin to each other. So you know right away, if you're a bear, you're going to have a problem with somebody who's a cheetah. So in that initial assessment, you identify that this target is a cheetah. I'm a bear. Am I willing to work twice as hard to find out if this is a viable target to be an asset? So our second step is to identify those conflicts. In contrast to the conflicts, in the same four-square grid, you've got people who are next to you, right? People who are tandem with you. Bears love foxes, right? There's no contrast there. Just because you have ideas doesn't mean that your ideas are against being a people person. And bears love lions. Bears and lions get along because they're just people. Cheetahs love foxes. Foxes have lots of ideas. Cheetahs don't have any ideas, right? Cheetahs also love lions because lions have checklists. Cheetahs can knock things off checklists, right? So you can see how they get along with each other, but it's the points of conflict that are the hardest. So when you're determining, I find this to be incredibly useful for business owners because most business owners, when you ask them, who is your target audience? They're like, everybody. Everybody could use my product. Everybody needs this. No, everybody does not need your product. Not everybody needs a magical sleeping pill. Not everybody needs a massage. Not everybody needs your pair of recycled shoes that are done with zero, environmental impact. That's not everybody loves those things. If you actually dig into finding your target audience, you will find a target temperament that would likely enjoy your product. And that immediately eliminates 75% of the population. That means of all the people in the world, now you're already 25% focused in on a niche.
I love this. What about if I'm in a negotiation with someone and I'm trying to get them to actually make the decision, and maybe it's like kind of tough? Is there anything that we can extract from CIA? Like if we're sitting across the table right now and we're trying to close a deal on something, is there something I'm trying to look for to get into your head to understand how you actually make the final decision?
It sounds like this isn't a negotiation. It sounds like this is a situation where you're trying to wait for somebody else to make a decision, which is a sale. A negotiation means you have something to offer and something to take away. So there's a back and forth. And this is a common mistake that people have. They call something a negotiation when it's actually a sale. A sale happens when the other person controls all the leverage, when they make a decision and you are subject to their decision. In a negotiation, you have tools to leverage their decision.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I want to give you I want to give you a real scenario that I sort of already started talking to you yesterday about. All right. Perfect scenario. We're sitting right here in my studio right now, and you see these big air cons we just put in here, they have to attach a big fucking thing on the roof, right? And when they were getting installed, we had the neighbor here come walk in here, and he's I don't know what you'd identify. Like, I like to look at people's like what their like just psychological needs are, and immediately I'm like, this guy is someone who needs to be seen as someone who's strong, right? So he came in like, who's the boss around here? I'm like, you're in my fucking place. It was just interesting. I'm like, a respectful person would do that, right? Come in, who's the boss around here? I'm like, me? I'm like, is there a problem? He's like, yeah, there is a problem. They can't go there. I'm like, oh, what happened? What happened? He's like, they're in my way. I look out, and now I see aircon units. I'm like, but are they in your property? That's why I asked him. I said, are they in your backyard? No, I can just see them on my roof, mate. They got to move. And I'm like, and then what I did straight away, because I could read, I'm like, this is someone that you don't challenge, because they will just go to the ends of the earth to like destroy you. So I said, I'm like, are you telling me these dickheads fucked up? Oh, bloody hell. No one can do a good job around here. Let me have a look for you. So I did that because I knew he would have like, felt good about that. But it didn't really get anywhere still. So what happened was he literally wants us to move the entire thing, which is going to cost thousands of dollars. And I have the leverage here because it doesn't bother me at all. But I also I was like, what's the price of just not pissing off a neighbor as well? I'm like, whatever. It's not $4,000. But, so I want to sort of run that scenario on what would happen if you're up against, because I know there's like, we have so many women that listen to this that can be in even Simona works in an environment where there's a lot of men, where they can try to dominate you. So what is the most effective way if you feel like you're in a conversation, like a conflict, like this guy, or a negotiation or a sale, and the other person's trying to dominate you? Is there a way to sort of like play to that person to, like, how do we navigate this?
So the first thing to do is really understand the risks and the benefits of a situation, right? You're in a situation with a pissed off neighbor. There's no risk to you. Mm-hmm. Again, we have a concept where we call real risk and perceived risk. Your concerns about hurting his feelings, your concerns about pissing off a neighbor, your concerns about pissing off somebody who's going to go to the ends of the earth to make your life miserable, those are all perceived risks. You're like, who knows what story you're saying in your own head about like, oh, he could call the police, or he could like piss on my AC units, or he could whatever. I don't even know. You're coming up with all these stories. Mm-hmm. The real risk is if you've followed the law and if you followed all of your local property requirements and it's your property, he has no say. There's millions of people a year all over the world who get pissed off because new development ruins their view. Welcome to that club, dickwad, right? Yeah. That's really all that there is to it. You have no real risk from this guy. So in a situation like that, that's not a sale. It's not a negotiation. It's just a dude trying to waste your time. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable for you to protect your time. It doesn't mean that there isn't a solution to it. It just means that the first step is, what are my real risks? What are my perceived risks? Let me turn off my perceived risks because they're not relevant, and let me focus on my real risks. Here, you don't have any real risks. Second to that, now you just want to create barriers. You want to create boundaries that protect your time. And this is the thing that I tell people all over the world, particularly professional women who are used to dealing with domineering counterparts, domineering customers, domineering bosses, domineering competitors, right? You've got to create barriers, not barriers where you cut them off, but barriers where you make it difficult for them to get back to you. Perfect thing to do here is to either have like a customer service person or like a personal assistant, and you're like, you know what, reach out to my person and they'll get it all fixed. So then you basically throw your person on the altar, but now you can have a conversation with your assistant where you're like, hey, anytime you get an email from this address, just ignore it. And then that person emails the assistant and emails. Your assistant can set up an automatic folder move. So it just moves them essentially to the dickhead folder. And then they don't even look at the dickhead folder. Now that guy just gets frustrated, and he has to ask himself every day, is it worth the resources I'm putting into this to get the outcome that's happening? And eventually they'll just give up, right? Anybody here who's ever purchased something from a scammer knows exactly what that's like. You get something and they don't honor their money back guarantee. You get something and then they don't honor their fulfillment. Or you get something and then nobody ever answers. You never get a human being on the phone, right? Why are they doing that to you? Because they're creating a barrier because professional organizations know that this is how it works. You can shut that guy up, just not instantaneously. If he's choosing to get on a high horse about the aircon, You can't get them off the high horse. And frankly, it's not worth your time to try.
Yeah. What if scenarios, at what point would things turn aggressive, right? Like in not just the scenario, but any scenario. Like let's say you're trying to do these things, and we'll stay on this topic because it's simple, right? If we keep ignoring him, for example, he can just rock back up here again.
Yep.
Rock back up again.
Yep.
At what point, is there a point where you ever stop trying to, like if someone's literally trying to throw their weight around on you, can you always resolve this with language and words? Or is there ever a point where you're just like, actually, either I gotta fuck this guy up or actually call police or something?
So fucking the guy up and calling the police are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we clarify that.
Fence.
Let's just make sure.
It comes in here.
Not in Australia. In Australia, if you touch that guy, I'm pretty sure you're going to jail.
Within reason. If he's not, yeah.
Go ahead and try and defend it. Go ahead and try and defend it.
I've got off on self-defense once, and I got charged with self-defense once.
So that's a net zero. That's a net zero. But what I would actually recommend is that if you've got all the leverage, then you have no reason to de-escalate. This is one of the things that makes Donald Trump as successful as he is, no matter how many people hate him, right? He understands that there's no reason to de-escalate if he has all the leverage. People sometimes mistake being nice with being smart. Being nice has nothing to do with being smart. There's plenty of dumb people who do nice things all the time, right? You don't have to be nice to be smart. You just have to be smart. So if you really have all the leverage, if you have all the leverage because you have the money and they're asking for your money, if you have all the leverage because you have the network and they're asking for your network, if you have all the leverage because you have the audience and they're asking for access to your audience, fuck them. You don't have to look at them and be a dick out of the gates. But if they start trying to muscle in, if they start trying to force their will upon you and you know you have all the leverage, you have nothing to lose. If you don't want to just cut them off, or maybe you do cut them off and block them, and then they try to escalate, there's no benefit to you de-escalating once they've escalated. You have all the leverage, right?
What if you don't have all the leverage?
Then you're actually in a different situation. Now you're in potentially a negotiation or potentially a sale, depending on who has the leverage.
And is it just try to get them to not understand that they have more leverage than you, or you don't have as much leverage as they have?
I'm not understanding your question.
Like if you know within, right? Shit, I actually don't have as much leverage, but I know they don't know that. At what point, like, are you just trying to mask it to be like, I have more leverage, even though you know internally you don't?
No, you don't try. That's called bluffing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bluffing is what you see in the movies and what you see in poker games. It's not what you see in real life. Professionals don't bluff like that. When a professional bluffs, it's because they have no other options, and they can't control the risk. So then they have one kind of Hail Mary option that if it goes wrong, they just run away, right?
Yeah.
Like we have a term called exfiltrate in CIA. Exfiltrate means when all shit falls apart and you've got to get off the get out of the country, and you've got to do it in a very resource intensive way, you will exfil from the country. Meaning, like, you're spending money on black ops teams, helicopters, and like digital erasures. Like that's an exfil. Nobody wants to be the person who costs $500,000 to get out of a country, right? Everybody wants to be the one who can self-evacuate. Just get yourself out of a bad situation.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure you understand, like we've gone in this conversation from a place where you have all the leverage to now you're kind of jumping to a scenario where you have no leverage, but you want to see whether or not they know that you have no leverage. And it's hard to kind of connect those two dots.
Yeah, I guess because not always, I think if you know you have all the leverage, it's simple. But then sometimes there's things.
It's obviously not simple, man. It's obviously not simple because you just walked me through a situation where you have all the leverage and you're wondering what you can do about this guy. You can call the police.
I'm going to
tell him you're going to call the police. You can tell him, if you knock on my fucking property again, I'm going to call the police. I'm not moving the aircon. You have no say here. You can move your apartment if you want to, right? But the thing is, it's not simple.
I guess
if it was simple, people wouldn't ask about it.
What I'm thinking is this, right? So what we have here, what would happen here in Australia is any time he is unhappy at all, it's a phone call to the council.
Okay.
But then there's nothing they can do, but it's just continual interruption.
Okay.
Continual, probably like,
the council.
Yeah. So
not of you.
But what we would do here. So like then it could just cause unnecessary bullshit that I wouldn't want to deal with. And that's the only thing I'm thinking.
Would it cause you bullshit?
It could.
So it's not even a high probability.
I don't know what the probability would be.
Perfect reason to give it to your assistant.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, anytime this comes in, it's your problem.
Yeah.
And just ignore the email.
So, because
I know it's uncomfortable, man. I know it's uncomfortable. This is the difference between people who live a life where they have to do it and people where it's optional, right? When you have to live a life that's uncomfortable, you very quickly start prioritizing between what discomfort you're willing to tolerate and what discomfort you're not. When you live a comfortable life, all of a sudden, all discomfort seems like it's equal to you, and it's not, right? You do a great job in Dream Out Loud of teaching people the value of moving into an uncomfortable zone, right? Getting into the unknown zone, I think is what you call it, right? The reason the unknown zone is so valuable is because it teaches you the lessons that you need to identify how to prioritize what bullshit actually requires your attention and what bullshit can just be ignored, because you're always living in a life full of discomfort. When you live in a life full of comfort, you get distracted by unnecessary bullshit all the time. That's what a lot of people who live in a comfortable world, they sit around talking about useless bullshit that's uncomfortable to all of them, as if it's ever going to change anything, complaining about their tax rates, complaining about their boss, complaining about, you know, the weather or the traffic or the price of gas. One of my favorite things in the United States is people bitch about the price of gas as if they have any control over it.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time.
So I guess, so when I was sort of wanting to throw this episode together, so we've hung out a few times this week when you've been here, there's been a couple scenarios I've observed you. I'm like, interesting behavior. And one of which being, so I'll give this the example. The other night, we're at the hotel together. And you're like, I've got this whiskey. And we're sitting in another bar. And you're like, hey, let's pour a glass. I'm like, they're not going to like that. But like, I'm a fan of not breaking the rules, but stupid rules that we're not hurting anyone. I'm a fan to just whatever. And I'm like, oh, we'll try to keep it subtle because if they see us, they're going to not like it. And sure enough, we poured the glass and the managers come over. Excuse me, sir, you can't have that there. And your response was, no, we're not drinking. It's not alcohol. It's just a gift. And they're like, oh, okay. And it went away if we drank it. And I was like, that was interesting. And what I could see, obviously, like linguistically, is just, it's not this, it's that. There's a change of frame. But and I want to see if this was just my perception or just your own personality or something that you've learned to do in a specific way. It wasn't just that time, but also when we're sitting as a group and they came over again and you're like, that's okay, they're waiting for me. You're going to have to come back later or something like that. And it was, what I witnessed was not necessarily the things you say, but how you said it. And you were very convicted. And it was almost like what you said was absolute truth. And it just, they walked away. Is there anything under that? Or is that just your own personality, knowing how to sort of just get someone to walk away for a while, or is there?
No, that's a lot of training and a lot of years spent in the field. So there's a couple things that you have to consider, right?
Yeah.
All human beings are not reactive, even though almost everything you've read says that human beings are reactive, right? There's probably very famous scholars out there who have said human beings are reactive, right? Human beings are not reactive. In fact, neuroscience shows that human beings are predictive, not reactive, meaning the decisions that you don't make because of the input. The decisions you make because of the expected outcome, right? Why do you pop out an umbrella when it's raining? Do you pop out the umbrella because it's raining? Or do you pop out the umbrella because you predict that the umbrella will keep you dry in the rain? Right? You see what I'm saying? That goes into everything we do. So especially when you're in a situation like what we found ourselves in the hotel, it wasn't managers speaking to us. It was ground level service employees, right? These service employees know, because they've been trained, what to watch out for. Hey, don't let people bring in their own alcohol. Don't let people gather in the foyer, like to hide from the rain, right? That's what they have been trained. So it doesn't matter if it's a pregnant lady in the foyer or if it's 25 sweaty guys like we had, right? If anybody connects in the foyer, they go to a checklist in their mind and they go in there like, oh, it's time to get those people out. What I learned in the field is that when people have a predictive decision in front of them, the next logical question they ask themselves after what they predict the outcome will be, the next question they ask themselves is, how much of my resources will go into this? There's 3 resources that we all have in common: time, energy, and money. Time, energy, and money. Only 3 resources that matter, right? So when somebody is coming up to you to challenge our whiskey, he's asking himself, how much time, energy, or money is it going to take for me to get the outcome I want from these 3 guys? if you can make them feel like the energy input is not worth it, that the resources they have to invest isn't worth the outcome they want, that they'll get their outcome in a different way with fewer resources, if you can give them that option, they'll take that option 100% of the time, because human beings are predictive, not reactive, right? They're predictive. So in both of those cases, all we did is, yes, we presented a reframe, right? It's not alcohol, it's a gift. That didn't actually convince him that it wasn't alcohol. He was still like, it says fucking whiskey right there, guys. Like, I know it's whiskey. Yeah. But what we told him was like, hey, we're going to celebrate and then we're going to be done. So to him, he's like, oh, well, I don't have to put a lot of time, energy, or money into this argument. I'll just see what happens. And guess what? We had a shot that we could cheers with, and we drank alcohol. We broke the rules right in the open, right? And he went to his manager who was watching. You could see his manager's the one that sent him to us. He went back to the manager, said something to the manager, and then the manager sat there and eagle-eyed us, but didn't say shit, right? And the same thing happened when we collected in the foyer of the luxury hotel. Somebody came over, was like, you guys can't collect here. And I was like, oh, we're going to be fine. They're waiting here with me. You're going to have to send a manager if you want this to change. He's thinking to himself, shit, I don't want to go talk to a manager. Like, he said that they're only there for a few minutes, so let's see what happens. It takes less resources to just see what happens.
So you try to make it harder for him to get what he actually wanted.
Highlight the difficulty of taking a different path other than my path. My path is sit back and watch us have a gift. My path is sit back and watch me talk to these people and then send them home. That doesn't take any effort from you. It's really easy for someone to say yes to getting what they want with very little resources. It's much harder to get someone to spend the resources to demand what they want.
What if he came back with a manager?
If he can't, I would talk to the manager and say the same thing.
You should bring back someone else.
Yeah. I mean,
the owner of this place.
Because, I mean, the reason I choose the locations I choose is so that I have leverage, right? Why was I staying at a luxury Marriott resort? Because I have incredible Marriott status, right? So as soon as a manager came over and was like, oh, what are you guys doing? I'd be like, look, here's my name, here's my room number, go talk to the desk, find out who I am, and if you still want to kick my people out, let's have a conversation. Because I promise you, he'd go over to his desk, he'd look up my status, he'd come back and be like, I'm sorry, Mr. Bustamante, for bothering you. You go ahead and complete your conversation, right?
Yeah.
I had all the leverage. If I were to do that in some place where I didn't have the leverage, it's a different game.
That's interesting. I love it. I love it. Is there anything, apart from that, trying to make it harder for them, is there anything... Because what I did see is, like, if we're understanding communication, the majority of communication is nonverbal. Like, some things when you speak, you do speak with a lot of, this is certain. I'm like, this is a very certain guy. But I'm like, he's probably like, he's not. So is this just your personality, or is this also something learned? Yeah, again, I can't claim credit for anything natural, right? Prior to 2007, prior to my recruitment to CIA, I was an Air Force weenie. And most people know exactly what it's like to be a rule-following weenie. And it either worked for you or it didn't work for you. But either way, you probably know what it's like to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I wish I was a little bit stronger and bolder and more courageous, right? All of that came because CIA taught me how to do it. I'm very susceptible to training. I'm very trainable, which is something that I think people who are trainable understand they're trainable and are seeking the right training. That's why I started a training company, was to give that training to people who already identify like, hey, I'm fucking trainable. I just need to know how to do the shit, right? So CIA identified in me very early on that it would take fewer steps to train me how to do something than it would take to train somebody else how to do something, because I'm very susceptible to the training. So they taught me how to use nonverbal and verbal cues in conjunction to deliver this predictable outcomes, because you could anticipate the thought process of an individual. So for example, when somebody walks up to you and you don't want to talk to them, when you put your hand out like this, that creates a subconscious barrier between you and them. So right away, they know that if they continue, there's going to be effort that they have to put into it, right? And then just like what you're saying, when you say that I'm a very certain person, I'm not necessarily certain in what I'm saying. I'm certain in what I fucking want. So when I say what I want, when I dictate what I think is going to happen, if you're not equally as determined, then right away you look at me and you question like yourself, not me. So think about how that works everywhere, how that works with anything from your barista to your kids, to a date, to your employees, to clients, to customers, right? When you can anticipate what they are going to act, how they're going to respond to your palm out, to your palm in, to your hand on your heart,
right? When you can anticipate how they're going to react to what you move, how you move, and what you say simultaneously, it puts you in a position of far more control than they have. That's how you can manipulate or motivate them in the direction you want them to go, because that's the outcome, what you want, not what they want.
I want to ask something that's definitely going to trigger some people, which is going to be awesome. I've heard through the grapevine that gaslighting is actually a form of, can be used in your favor to get what you want as well.
For sure. Yeah. Gaslighting is a very effective strategy. It's been around for a long time. It's been used for a long time. The people who don't like gaslighting don't like it because they realize they're too fucking stupid to realize when they're being gaslit.
Mm.
And gaslighting is a very predictable thing. You have this fantastic case study that you present during your Dream Out Loud training, where you talk about these actors who are sent into a room where there's only one real person, right? 4 actors and one real person.
Ash experiment.
Yes. And these 5 people sit in a room together and they're asked to determine which line on a wall is different. There's 3 lines of equal length and there's 1 line of a long length. The 4 actors come in and they act coordinatedly like one of the short lines is the different line, which leaves the person who's real scratching their own head. Like, wait a second. It's very obvious here. One of these lines is twice as long as the rest. But why is everybody saying that this other line is the one that's different when it's this line that's different? And then after a while, the person who has been like believing, the person who sees and recognizes which line is the correct line actually changes their opinion and then chooses the same line as everybody else. That is gaslighting, right? There's an argument in psychology that people say that the innocent person is changing their view of reality. There's an equal argument in psychology that they still know it's really true, but they're seeking to belong to a tribe. They don't want to be an outlier. So they'll say whatever they have to say to belong to the group. You have another fantastic example of people turning left versus turning right. Turning right, they know they go back to the tribe. Turning left, they know they go into danger. Well, one person knows that turning left is bad. Everybody else decides to turn left. And then when that one person who knows that the way to safety is to the right, when that person still follows the crowd, why do they do that? Why do they follow the crowd into danger? Because they subconsciously feel safer with people rather than feeling safe on a path by themselves. Another perfect form of gaslighting. But is it that their reality is changing? They think they're actually going to be safer on the left, or do they want to belong to a crowd? Gaslighting is just forcing people to want to belong to a crowd, because if they feel like they're making something up, if they feel like they're crazy, they feel like they're outside of the in-crowd, and that in-crowd bias takes over.
So that's essentially what it is. So trying, is it blame? Because the word does get thrown around a lot as well. Like, you're gaslighting. So how would you actually explain, like, what is gaslighting? Is it just getting you to believe that what you're seeing is not actually what you're seeing? Or
so there's actually gaslighting happening in the headlines right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that this might come out after this article, but if anybody listening to this looks up Signalgate, Signal, S-I-G-N-A-L, Signalgate, or the Signal debacle in the United States, right? What happened is that just this week, several national security experts at the highest level of government in the United States communicated war plans using a messaging system called Signal. The whole world believes that Signal is a clandestine, like a secret encrypted system, right? However, there's no American a policy that lets people communicate on Signal national security secrets, right? So national security secrets are supposed to be used on different platforms, not Signal. So here you have all these muckety-mucks in the United States communicating war plans on Signal.
wow.
They get caught because they accidentally add a journalist to their list. So now this journalist sees the whole group chat, and the journalist is like, this is fucking illegal, and makes a story about it, right? That's how the whole thing comes to light. Well, now it's going to court in the United States. And inside the court, the national security team is saying, we didn't say anything that was considered secret or confidential in our chat. But they're not releasing the chat to the court, right? So you got the biggest names in the United States government saying, we didn't say anything classified. And the court saying, prove it. And then the people in the national security part of the United States are saying, well, we can't give it to you, because if we give it to you and there's anything classified, then we broke our classification laws, right? That is an example of you can't have what you want. You have to believe us with what we say, and all the people who say something different are wrong. The United States has learned that if you say the same thing over and over again, people will eventually believe what you say, or they'll let it go because, just like our example from the hotel, it's not worth the resources to keep fighting it.
That's so interesting. So I can catch myself. There's so many times where I'm like, I know you're wrong, but I just couldn't be fucked. Continue.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's important to be aware of it, because I can be aware if it's being done to me. This is why I really unpack all this stuff. So it's exciting. But one area that I do want to dive into is sexpionage. You've talked a bit about this, and and I know obviously there's something being out in the field, like having to flirt with your asset and pick them up essentially, and use your sexual energy. And how unpack this for us, because when it comes to this topic, I know nothing. So how can we, tap into this type of influence and use it for what we want?
So first of all, it's a misnomer that sexpionage is common. Sexpionage is not common, right? I think you said, that there's times where you have to flirt with your asset. No, that is not true. Some countries have chosen to make sexpionage part of their standard MO, modus operandi, their standards of operation. Other countries have chosen to make sexpionage strictly forbidden from their MO. The UK, Australia, the United States. We expressly forbid sexual operational leverage as a tool for long-term operations, because we've learned over time that it doesn't have the long-lasting value that we want it to have, where your Chinese, your Cubans, your Russians still use it all the time because they value short-term operations more than long-term operations. That said, there's still some very real elements of sexual opportunity, sexual advantage that come from sexual exploitation operations, or what's known as sexpionage, sexual exploitation operations. Human beings all have sexual desire. Human beings also all have sexual drive. But sex drive and sex desire are not the same thing, even though they're oftentimes considered the same thing, right? A man who has a strong sex drive doesn't just fuck anything. We joke that he would, but he actually doesn't. There's plenty of things he's not going to stick his dick into, right? Similarly, a woman who has a low sex drive is not absent of sexual desire, right? She still desires sexual connection. She's just not driven by the energy that comes from sex desire, right? So you have to understand the difference between desire and drive. Desire is what you emotionally want. Drive is what compels you to move forward. So a guy with a high sex drive, or a gal with a high sex drive, might constantly go out and socialize trying to find a partner, but that doesn't mean that they're going to have sex with anybody. Somebody with a high sexual desire, male or female, is going to be out there looking for someone to connect with, to have an intimate relationship, right? Now, if you take away the idea of sex from that whole conversation, what do you actually have? You have a motivating factor and a personal connection. Motivating factor and personal connection. That's everything that makes up human beings. Are we going to go out and get along because we have a shared motivational factor? Or are we going to go out and get along because we have a shared human connection? Right? That's why the Brits, the Aussies, the Canadians, the Americans, that's why we don't feel like we have to use sexual exploitation operations. Because you can create human connection, you can create motivational factors faster, easier, and in spades compared to what the Russians and the Chinese do, trying to create just sexual desire or just sexual drive.
Is there a way to use sexual energy or the flirty charm? I know that was definitely a thing that's worked for me. Like something that comes naturally for me is being able to connect very quickly with someone just from not flirty, but flirty. And I've even talked with Simone about this. I'm like, even before we got together, I'm like, that's just how I, use it with, dating women, but also prospecting people in the streets, selling my business. I'd build a connection and it'd be that type. And it just came natural to me. But is this something that's a taught thing or a learned thing or something that people can learn from? Is it useful?
Yeah, it's limited in its utility, right? I mean, I hate to be the one to break it to you. If that's what you've been doing, you've been suboptimal your entire sales career, because what you're doing is actually wasting energy, creating this flirtatious foundation that's never actually going to be fulfilled for them. But what you can't anticipate is how they will react when they are ultimately disappointed by the fact that they created some story in their head based on your flirtatious appeal, right? When you are friendly and when you are open and when you are transparent, but you very clearly delineate the difference between intimate connection versus professional connection, what oftentimes happens is a person who came into it because they wanted an intimate connection, when they are internally faced with choosing between intimate connection or professional connection, they still choose the professional connection because they don't want to be embarrassed to themselves of being like, oh, I thought that guy was flirting with me, right? Oh, he's not flirting with me, so I'm no longer interested. No, instead they're like, oh, I thought he was flirting with me, but in fact, he's being way more professional than I'm being. So now I'm going to listen to him and commit to him even more because he's a professional, right? That's what science and experience in espionage has proven out for the West, is that even if you do have like an inert flirtatiousness, and lots of people do, lots of people are approached constantly and they have to correct other people like, actually, I wasn't flirting with you. I smile at everybody, I touch everybody, I giggle at everybody, right? I wasn't flirting with you. The optimal way is, if that's your natural course, you have to flip it to a professional relationship, because your long-term utility comes from a professional controlled structure in the relationship. Who sets the direction and who follows the direction? In a sexual relationship or in a personal, intimate relationship, it's not so clear. Who sets the direction, who acts, and who directs, right? Just think about your own personal relationship with your partner. Sometimes she calls the shots. Sometimes you call the shots. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? And of all the conflict that you probably have together, it probably stems from a situation where you don't know who's calling the shots in that exact situation. Do you want that professionally, or do you want to have really clear customers that understand, I call the shots, you take the direction, you have the breakthroughs, and then you tell me about your success, right? That's the most successful way.
What's your thoughts on the whole Trump and Zelensky negotiation that happened just a few weeks ago?
I mean, in 2022, I had a conversation with Lex Friedman, and I told him how this whole Ukraine thing was going to end. And all that we've seen happen between Trump and Zelensky since Trump took office is basically a play-by-play of what I told Lex would happen, right? The United States is going to back away. Europe is going to back away with the United States. Because when you look at the economic benefits of Ukraine and how that economic benefit plays out for the West, it's almost non-existent. Where the economic benefit of Ukraine to Russia is significant, right? So Russia is very focused on winning Ukraine because it matters to them economically. Poland is very committed to defending Ukraine, not because Ukraine matters to Poland, but because Poland fucking hates the Russians. That's it. That's the only reason, right? The United States is trying to fight the Russians through Ukraine as a proxy. But now that our economy is tanked and our dollars and our inflation is up and all, like, our people are pissed, then it's going to be hard to continue supporting Zelensky. And I think what you've seen happen since the Trump administration took over, from the lambasting of Zelensky in the Oval Office, all the way down to the fact that Europe is backing out of their deals with Ukraine now, all of that is just predictive human behavior when the tides change and people no longer support the promise of your democracy.
Well, what do you think went wrong in that? I'm talking about the Oval Office talk when J.D. Vance was, that whole thing just went bluff. Well, what do you think kind of went wrong there? Was it the fact that Zelensky had zero leverage?
Bingo.
Coming in thinking he did?
Bingo. He had perceived leverage that worked with the Biden administration, right? Zelensky's leverage with the Biden administration was, we are trying to be a democracy, and if you fight for us, you fight for democracy. And the United States, progressive liberal audience could take that message and amplify it and win general support for it. Plus, there was very reasonable conservative benefits as well. Testing our weapons, Ukraine is indebted to the United States significantly. I mean, you saw that really come out in these negotiations. Donald Trump was like, hey, you're going to give us your mineral rights, and you're going to give us, the first opportunity to drill mines and build infrastructure in Ukraine because you owe us all of a sudden, like the 3 years of money that we gave to them, now all of a sudden it's money they owe to us. It's not a surprise. Ukraine knew that. The American government knew that, but that's not what we said to the world in our narrative, right? We said something very different. So Zelensky thought that the same leverage, you're fighting for democracy, would carry weight. With a new administration, that doesn't carry weight, especially since Ukraine is not a fucking democracy. Ukraine is a corrupt, broken government. It always has been. It is based off of the Russian system. Like, and that's not me talking. That's multiple nonprofit. That's multiple NGOs. That's multiple studies. Like their democratic index is like 30 out of 100. It's terrible. So the fact that we ever were able to even get people to believe that we were fighting for democracy by fighting for Ukraine is an example of gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it even looks like, from what we've seen, looks like there's, you know me, I love a good conspiracy. I'll always understand a good conspiracy, but they all have, I think we talked about this in the last episode, actually, like conspiracies exist because when the event happens, there's a lack of any information. So then you got all these people, but there's looks like there's other alternative motives for keeping that war going.
Yeah.
Are you thinking the same thing? Or
I mean, we've always known that there's ulterior motives that have been dictated to Ukraine by all of the countries that have agreed to give them benefits, right? Like Zelensky must know. Here, I've had multiple conversations with experts in the field who all agree that early on, the first time that Zelensky and Putin sat across from the table, which was like 3 months into the war, 6 months into the war, the first time they sat across from each other at the table, Zelensky's leverage was the same as it is now. It was 0, right? If anything, he had slightly more leverage because he had less dead troops. That's it, right? But ever since then, Russia has just grown the number of troops, turned on their war machine, grown the number of allies. China's become close. Iran's become close. North Korea has given them troops. Like Russia's just grown. All Ukraine did was become like a delivery vehicle for everybody else to throw shit at them, but not give them people, right? So if you don't have people, you can't prosecute a war. The situation didn't change that much over time. What most likely happened, and most experts would agree, the United States government told Putin or told Zelensky to reject Putin's offer because they knew that if we could have 13 months of war, that would be a huge benefit for America. It'd be a huge benefit for the NATO countries. It would give us a way for us to push our dated armory, our dated weapons, our new weapons that are yet untested in the field. We can push all of that to Ukraine. We can let their people use our weapons. We can see how the weapons perform in the field against a giant like Russia. We can see if the paper tiger is real or not. And we can do all of that without risking a single British death, American death, French death, Polish death. We can do it all without dealing with any of that. Even if there were NATO countries that didn't want to play that game, NATO basically belongs to the United States, which is why Germany and France and Spain wisely in the last 3 years have said they want to separate themselves from the United States because they realize NATO is just a holdover from World War II where the United States has forced all these other countries to do their bidding, right? To do the Americans' bidding, buy American weapons, execute on American bases in your country. Like NATO is a challenge that even Trump doesn't support anymore. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out moving forward.
So I got a kind of interesting question that I was thinking, should I ask this? And then, like, fuck it, let's ask it. Our last episode blew up, went super viral, and I don't know if you probably wouldn't read any comments ever.
I don't read any comments ever.
Yeah,
anybody who has a podcast,
yeah,
don't waste your time reading comments.
Yeah, I don't ever, but I feel the team were like, everyone thinks Andrew's a spy still. And I know Andrew Schultz asked you, and I'm like, and I joked with someone the other day, like, is Andrew still a spy? And I'm like, I don't think so. But I'm like, but I'll tell you what, the more I talk with Andrew, the more I want to be a fucking spy. I'm like, what if when you left CIA, you didn't leave CIA, but they were like, you're our new poster boy because we got to recruit. And then you're the new CIA influencer. So the question everyone's asking, are you still in CIA?
I am not part of CIA, but there's a nuance to that, right? I am not paid by CIA. I am not acknowledged by CIA unless you have a formal acknowledge request in. Like if you formally send a message to their Office of Personnel Management on letterhead that asks if I have served there, that's the only time that you trigger the reciprocity, the requirement, basically the legal requirement for them to respond to you and tell me yes.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, they can deny me all they want, right? And I am not under CIA direction. They don't tell me what to do or where to go, right? That said, I took a lifetime secrecy agreement with CIA when I took my oath to work there. So anything I do, anything I say, anything I publish, I can be held liable and accountable under the full extent of the law, that if I disclose anything that's classified, if I disclose anything that's operationally impactful to their current field operations, I can be prosecuted in a court of law and go to jail. So why do I say that? I say that because CIA gets all the benefits. They have all the leverage. I know they have all the leverage. CIA, whoever the poor bastard is that has to watch my content, I'm telling you now, I know you have the leverage, right? They have the leverage. So if they want me to be their poster boy, they just sit back and let me talk.
Mm-hmm.
They let me say what I want to say, because if I ever step out of line, they can put me in jail.
Yeah.
Right? They know that if I'm going to do anything that really pushes the envelope, like I'm doing with my new book, if I'm going to do anything that pushes the envelope, I have to run it by them first for approval.
Mm-hmm.
My book, Shadow Cell, which anybody can find and pre-order now, Shadow Cell, cell with a C. If you look up my book, you'll see on the webpage that I've built for it, it took us 3 years to get that approved by CIA. For anybody who's ever written a book, most shitty authors take years to write their book halfway. We wrote our book in like 9 months. It took 2.5 years after that for us to go through all the process of getting CIA to review it again, and get them to accept what do we have to do to publish this book? Because it was very sensitive. It's very cutting edge. It's talking about modern threats and modern tradecraft that nobody's ever written about, because nobody's as currently out of CIA as we are, my wife and I. So that lifetime secrecy agreement kind of works like a collar around my neck.
Mm-hmm.
The CIA kind of holds the leash. So do I work for them? No. But do they have all the leverage over me? Yes. If you want to hate me for that, that's fine. Leave it in the comments.
Yeah. Just fire out the comments. Share this to your friends, actually. Just get mad. Get mad about it. I want to ask a question for the conspiracy theorists out there. If you ever slipped up and stepped out of line, is it a matter of they'll prosecute you, or is it more so a matter of you're afraid of living?
No, that's a great question. So, again, I am not opposed to conspiracies. I'm not opposed to it, because just like 9 out of every 10 ideas are bad ideas, 9 out of every 10 conspiracies are bullshit. But 1 out of every 10, there might be real grounds to, right? So I want to encourage people to always be suspicious and skeptical without being speculative, right? That's the difference. Professionals are skeptical. Idiots are speculative. But my point is, if I were to step out of line, if any former intelligence officer were to step out of line, it doesn't make any sense for CIA to quietly kill us. Doesn't make any sense. Never made sense. Going all the way back to JFK and his theories about JFK, it makes no sense to silence somebody publicly. What Putin does, like what he did to, I forget the guy's name in 2023, the guy who was his friend and then they blew up his plane. I forget his name. But what Putin did to him to just silence him publicly is less effective than what we do here in the United States. In the United States, when you step out of line, you are publicly arrested. You are publicly prosecuted. You are publicly tried. And then you are put in jail. And the government sends that shit far and wide. They make a huge deal out of it, because for every other American out there who's thinking about stepping out of line, they make an example out of you, that inside the course of the law, they will publicly humiliate and destroy you. Whereas when you die in a surprise explosive airplane, now all of a sudden people are always like, well, was that just an accident, or was that actually orchestrated? And they never know for sure. When you're tried and disciplined publicly, they know for sure. And that's what keeps people in line. That's how a government keeps control over a population, because it lets them know you can't escape the law. We even say that in the United States. You can't escape the law. Crime doesn't pay, right? These are actually factually wrong.
Unless you're Hunter Biden, isn't it?
They are factually wrong statements, but they still persist.
Yeah. I saw that when Trump got in. I saw someone retweeted Biden going, "No one's above the law," and then they retweeted except Hunter Biden, because it was like Hunter Biden is now, what do they call it when they forgive you for doing all this stuff?
Pardon,
right?
Biden pardoned his family, for crying out loud.
Right, correct.
After saying he wouldn't do it, after spending months saying he wouldn't do it, he then did it, which is a perfect example of how much confidence even the president at the time had in the democratic process of the United States.
Yeah. One thing you said to us the other day, so we spent an entire day the other day here in Australia doing your Streetcraft event, which you spent half a day teaching us how to be a spy. Then we spent half a day being a spy for the best we could do anyway.
Yeah, you guys did great.
Yeah. And one of the things you said to us is anytime you feel yourself or hear yourself saying, I should do something, right? And I've always sort of been like, in terms of your goals in life, if you catch yourself saying like, oh, I should do this, that's an indicator that you live in someone else's value. And should is connected to like values. That you sort of said in a way where you're like, if you catch yourself saying like, well, I shouldn't take money from someone, that's bad. It's an ethical problem, which I think anyone listening to this would be like, well, I would agree. You shouldn't take money from someone. Then you get the context, well, if you're put in another country with a new identity, you have no money, you have to, from the ground up, go and acquire money.
Right.
So you have to move ethical things out of the way sometimes to actually get what you want. And I'm curious to sort of unpack that a bit. Like, how do you ever get through that without really experiencing guilt? Because I think in business, I've had to learn the hard way because I'm quite like wear my heart on my sleeve sometimes. Like, I want everyone to win. When I've grown bigger business, I understand that I have to win first. There's some business deals where I'm like, I can't feel sorry for you because you know what? If I don't do this, then I'll get fucked.
You know what's funny is you don't actually want everyone to win. I've seen you. I've seen you behind the scenes.
I've had to learn it. I've had to learn to, I used to, a few years ago, be like, hey, let's all win. And then you know what? What happened? I've been fucked. So I'm like, you know what? I will set the boundaries and make sure we win to a degree. I will make sure that I won't get fucked.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So you're already on that operational path.
Yeah. So I've had to learn to bring it into business.
Absolutely.
And I want to sort of like unpack that. So how do you sort of do this without feeling guilty at all?
So, I mean, you've probably seen the pattern that one of the big things that CIA does is it transforms our belief systems, right? It takes an assumed belief or it takes a cultural belief and then it breaks it into the core vocabulary, and then it defines the vocabulary so that we can all have a common language. And then from our common language, we can then add new value statements on top of those words, right? So the word that I want to break down right now is ethics. You've talked about ethical. I shouldn't do something. It's ethically wrong, right? Another word that oftentimes comes up when people mistakenly talk about what you should and shouldn't do is morals, right? Morality. This is immoral. This is unethical. But people don't talk about the difference between morals and ethics, right? They're not the same thing. So what's the difference between morals and ethics? Ethics are something that's a norm of behavior that's set by an outside organization, an outside policy, an outside group, an outside program. Nurses have an ethical oath. Doctors have an ethics oath. Lawyers, right? They have an oath of ethics. If you don't have an outside association dictating your ethics, then all you're really left with is your internal morals, what you believe to be right and true and normal, right? Morals are something you define for yourself. Ethics are something that's defined for you. So CIA has a code of ethics, and our code of ethics extends only to CIA, not to the government of the United States, not to the American people, to the organization that is CIA. Everybody else outside the organization does not get the benefit of our ethics code, right? When you're a clandestine officer with CIA, you lie to the IRS. You lie to the bank that's giving you a loan. You lie to your mom. You lie to your dad. You lie to your professors. They will change the internet so that your whole history is a lie, right? They don't care. The ethics, the code of ethics is to the CIA. Same thing is true for MI6 in the UK. Same thing is true for ACIS here in Australia. Same thing is true for the Canadians with CSIS. Same thing is true for Mossad. Same thing is true for MSS in China. Same thing is true for SVR in Russia. Your code of ethics ties back to the organization. Your morals, your internal belief system, when you're recruited specifically because all of that psychological testing shows that you are morally flexible. You'll change your morals based on the situation, right? So when you're the kind of person who says, well, I shouldn't punch a dude in the face, but if somebody started to try to bully my kid, I'd punch that dude in the face. you're morally flexible,
Mm.
right? It's not a code of ethics. That's morals. If you're the kind of person that's like, well, I would never steal. I would never steal. And then your wife is starving and you steal for her, that's moral flexibility, right? What happens is a lot of times as kids especially, we have our first experience with moral flexibility because we want a candy bar, but we don't have enough money for a candy bar. So what do some of us do?
Steal it.
Boom. That's not what most people would say. Most people would say,
Ask my parents.
exactly.
That's what we did growing up. We would steal.
I would steal too. Lots of people steal, and then they go on feeling like they are somehow less of a person because they don't have morals. How can I go to church if I steal? How can I be a good husband if I steal now? How can I be a good kid? How can I be a good student? Like, oh, I must be a loser because I steal. You're just morally flexible. The future belongs to the people who are morally flexible, because if you don't define your own morals based on the situation, if you're not the one defining your morals, somebody else is defining your morals. And if somebody else is defining your morals, it's probably not going to be in your best interest.
I want to do something really special and different in this podcast episode because we have a live audience here and we have a bunch of people stream this as well. And before we sort of start to wrap this up, I have like a final question here is where do you see CIA going with everything? I know you told me the other day, Trump and CIA have never been friends, and Trump's just in. Where do you see the future of CIA? Is it something that's going to be bigger, stronger than ever, or is it still going to stay the same they've always been, or where do you see it happening?
So espionage doesn't change. It changes in small degrees. It doesn't change in massive upheaval, right? So Trump is a president. He'll be president for 4 years, and then somebody else is going to be president. CIA is going to outlive these 4 years, just like they outlived the first 4 years. If anything, Trump's first 4 years with CIA were way more hostile between the two of them than they are right now, especially with the appointment of Director Ratcliffe, who is pro Donald Trump, right? So I think CIA has a very positive future ahead of it. I actually think that CIA will come out bigger, stronger, better, at least in the short term, because a lot of the politics that came from the Biden administration, favorable treatment of DEI and giving people appointments just because they were transgender or just because they were like, they had some political motivation instead of a skills-based capacity motivation, right? I think that's the right direction. CIA should be an organization of practicality, not an organization of political policy. Same thing is true for intelligence services all over the world. Their job is to maximize national security impact to their population. If you pick a they instead of a he to take a certain seat, specifically because they call themselves they and he calls himself he, not because of the skills they bring to the table, then you're actually doing a disservice to the population that they're supposed to protect. So I think CIA has a positive short-term future, and then I think their long-term future is really going to be decided by how they handle the changeover from the current president to the next president. Because if they continue to try to fight with the chief executive, CIA falls under the executive branch of the United States. Their boss is the president, just like DOD falls under the executive branch. So nobody gets very far if they fight against their boss. Nobody gets very far if the person who feeds you is the person that you fight. So I think what we have is a question of what happens next, not what happens in the next president after Donald Trump, not what happens during Donald Trump.
Awesome. So I know you and your wife have a book that's about to be released, and in it you've talked all about these crazy operations that have never been talked about, disclosed ever. Where can everyone get your book and see everything you guys are doing online?
So it's a worldwide release that's going to happen in September. So I'll actually include the link below in the description of this podcast. But if you want to go directly to the book yourself, you can find it at Shadow Cell Book, Shadow CELL, shadowcellbook.com in the United States, or shadowcellbook.com/headline if you're a UK person.
Amazing. All right. So what we're going to do, because we have a live audience here, and we are going to, instead of me asking you the final question that I usually ask, I'm going to let them ask some questions. So we have no idea where this is going to go. And we're going to do this for a little bit. We're going to take a couple questions. And I'm excited to see what they've got in the bag. First question from the audience.
So my question to you, Andrew, is in high pressure situations when there's a lot of overwhelming things happening to you, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. The question is, in an overwhelming situation, when your senses are heightened, when you're feeling your heart race, when you're feeling sweaty, when you're feeling nervous? How do you calm down, essentially? How do you gain control again? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we have a fantastic hack that we use at CIA where we reconnect with each of our 5 senses. In just a few seconds of time, we will literally ask ourselves 5 questions. What do I taste? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I feel? What do I see? Right? And we'll touch base with those 5 questions and bring us back to this present moment. And in the process of asking those 5 questions, what happens is it hacks your body into distracting itself away from the thing that's making it nervous, right? So if you're facing a crocodile and you're terrified by this crocodile, you can literally say, what do I feel? Meaning, what do you feel in your body? I feel my heart beating in my chest. I feel the ground under my feet. I feel my shorts around my waistband. Just right there, your heartbeat drops a little bit. Your blood pressure drops a little bit. What do I smell? I smell the dirt in the air. I smell the salt water. What do you hear? I hear the splashing. I hear the birds calling in the distance. I went for a run this morning. I'm going to give you a long answer because it's such a great question. I went for a run this morning, and it was like a crazy storm out here this morning. And the storm didn't start until I was a mile into the 4-mile run. So and I'm getting on a plane tonight. So I was like, well, fuck. I'm like carrying soaking wet shoes and a soaking wet outfit onto a plane for a 14-hour flight to the Americas. This is shitty, right? But instead of getting all hung up on how inconvenient it was going to be, I went through this exact process and I was like, well, what do I feel? And then I felt the warm air, but the cold rain. And what do I smell? I smelled the crashing waves because the salt water was getting kicked up by the storm. What do I hear? I heard the raindrops like bouncing off of my shirt that was saturated. And if you've ever heard raindrops on a saturated shirt, it makes a specific kind of ping sound. And all of a sudden I found myself calming down and feeling not only more comfortable on my run, but blessed to be out here in Australia on a run in the middle of this nasty storm that no sensible Australian was in. And that's just such a great example of exactly what you asked.
Amazing. Okay, so let's go 1 to virtual, and Josh will grab the microphone. And what's their name? Say their name so they know.
Yeah, so this one is from Steve, and he said, as an older traveler on this journey in life, is there actually a chance for me to succeed, or am I just kidding myself? This is my biggest concern or fear.
So I love that question, Steve, because the idea that age is an element is part of our fabrication, right? That's something we tell ourselves. That's a social construct that doesn't have any objective truth behind it. When your age is something that only limits you as much as you let it limit you, with the exception of any actual physical limitations, right? If you can't reach a certain level over your head, then that's a reality. But when it comes to success and what you can achieve, age is, if anything, a huge advantage because you've learned more about life. You've learned more about the realities of how people work, if you're willing to let yourself see the realities of how people work. And you've learned more than anybody who's young, right? Consider a 50-year-old person versus a 22-year-old person. That 22-year-old person has really only experienced life from the age of 22 back to about 15, 7 years of life, where that 50-year-old has experienced life all the way back to when they were 15, which is 35 years of life, right? So it's a very, very different set of experiences that you can leverage to your advantage if you understand it as leverage. If you understand it as a flaw or a weakness, you're going to be trapped.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Let's come back to in person. Right here. What was your name again, sorry?
Georgia.
Georgia.
Hi.
Hi, Georgia.
I wanted to know about the last story. You said that your wife is also in the CIA. Did you meet in the CIA? Were you on a mission together? Like, give me the whole spiel, and what was that like navigating?
Yeah, so my wife and I did not know each other prior to CIA. We met at CIA. She came in from Florida from a life of helping refugees, and she had a law degree, and she was bleeding liberal heart. I came in from the military where I handled nuclear weapons, where I was like totally ready to destroy an entire continent if I had to. So we were not a match made in heaven by any means. But we started at CIA on the same start day. And about 2.5 weeks into our training, we ended up being in the same training class. And there's all sorts of nuances like there are with any love story. But essentially we met, She flirted with me first. I'm not stupid, so I took the bait. And then, like, the day of our date, she realized that she was there at CIA to become a CIA officer, not to become a girlfriend. So she tried to cancel the date. So that turned into like months of awkwardness where I felt like I must have done something wrong because she canceled the date. And she felt awkward about canceling the date. So now we're actively trying to avoid each other, even though we keep crossing paths in training. So long story short, after a series of months of training, we ended up standing next to each other in this mandatory meeting that was talking about something terrible that had happened at CIA, a death in Afghanistan. And we couldn't help but stand next to each other the way that the seating was arranged. And after that, she just kind of was like, I didn't mean to cancel on you. And I was like, I didn't mean to offend you. And we started talking again. And a year after that, we started dating. We went through the whole friendship process of being like, hey, you're a career officer, I'm a career officer, and we can be professionals, to then a year later not being so professional. And then another year after that, we got engaged. And then after that, we got married. And once we got married, life changed significantly because CIA does not like married officers. It likes single officers and it loves divorced officers, but it doesn't like married officers. So after navigating that process, some of which we talk about in our book, Shadow Cell, after navigating that process, they decided that instead of fighting us, it would be less resources for them if they assigned us on operations together. And that's really what led to our success in our Shadow Cell process and our Shadow Cell program that we wrote the book about.
Amazing. How come they don't like married people in CIA?
Because married people put something above the mission. They put something above the organization.
Yeah.
And divorced people lose half their net worth. And how else are you going to build back your net worth? Double down on the mission.
All right, final one on Zoom.
Cool. This one is from Damien, and he says, Andrew, what is one modality or training that you'd learn that has the biggest impact on people's lives?
I love this question, Damien, because the first product I ever built, the first digital training program I ever built, was the program from CIA that had the biggest impact on me. The program that in my world, it's called OpThink. For anybody who goes to everydayspy.com or anybody who visits my website, you'll see my course OpThink. OpThink is short for operational thinking. And operational thinking is exactly what CIA taught me, to stop looking at the world through gains and losses, benefits and risks, good and bad, right and wrong, like all that value-based stuff that is internally derived, is not objective, but is subjective in nature. It holds us back. Operational thinking is very pragmatic. It's very objective, and it transforms the way that you think about problems. It transforms the way that you think about opportunities. It transforms the way that you view the world, just like it did for me. So that was the first thing I wanted to give people. I knew that I went through almost $2.5 million worth of training with CIA. There's no way I was going to be able to give $2.5 million worth of training to everybody. But if I could give them 1% of that, how much would the world change? So that's when I created OpThink, because operational thinking was the modality that changed my life from CIA.
Boom, boom. All right, well, I think we're wrapping this up. Thank you. All right, I think we're wrapping this up. Well, I mean, I don't usually end the podcast like this, but I think that was fun. That was cool. Give these guys a chance to come in. I hope you guys got some value from this. So your book's coming out. Link's going to be below. They can go and get your book. That's going to be awesome. And apart from that, so good hanging out in Australia this week. And thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Anytime, man. Good luck. And I can't wait to see everybody the next time in Australia.
Let's go. Boom.
Boom, boom.